The Beast of Elderton, a short horror story, written by Stories from the Attic, narrated by Robin Mcconnell. In many ways, Elderton was the same as most small Canadian towns. The road into town was also the road out, and along its sides, the town was studded with the sort of small businesses and family-run concerns you'd find anywhere across the country and in similar-sized towns across North America. There were 2 diners and a slightly more upmarket place where couples would go when they wanted something a little more fancy, or a guy wanted to impress his girl on a date. There were 3 or 4 bars, where the same groups of men hung out every night of the week and were joined by the less committed patrons for the live music most Friday and Saturday nights. We had a gas station, a grocery and hardware store, the police station where Sheriff Beaumont and his deputy Lanny spent most of their time resting their heels and playing poker, and we had a town hall, which was a new building stylized to look like an old one, columns and all, in an attempt to lend the place some gravitas. We had all this and just enough residents to fill the business and make this human ant farm tick over nicely. As I said, Elderton was like most small towns. What made it different was that in addition to all of these things, Elderton also had a werewolf. I remember the first time that I heard that word werewolf spoken with honest-to-God seriousness in a town meeting. It was thundered out by Mike Ronston, a local mechanic and a man not unaccustomed to being very vocal in this kind of situation. That night, he stood up and, swiping his red cap from his head dramatically to underline the seriousness of his words, called out the leaders on the stage by using that word like a bludgeoning instrument, forcing forward his point and clearing the way for the sharp end of his ultimatum. I know that nobody wants to say it, but we're all thinking it. It ain't a coincidence that this is the fullest town meeting I can ever remember. Folks are scared. Damn it, I'm scared. Mike gestured towards his heavily pregnant wife, Tina, who was sitting beside him in one of the uncomfortable plastic chairs dragged out for such meetings and cradling her bump in her arms protectively. I got a kid and 2 more on the way. How am I supposed to sleep at night knowing that they gotta worry about things like werewolves? Whit Mellor, the town councillor, raised a hand as if to stop Mike and dismiss this talk of supernatural monsters, but clearly overestimated the power that his raised palm had. Ignoring the hand, Mike simply kept right on, his words like a snowball, gathering mass as they built momentum. Momentum formed from the approving and supportive sounds from the men seated around him, and the muttered agreement from others who were also clearly frightened out of their wits. It ain't no coincidence that this meeting has been called earlier than any other town meeting, that the date is earlier in the month than most to avoid the full moon. We ain't stupid, Whit. We know you're thinking the same thing we are, and you just don't want to admit it because it'll go down in the minutes and people in the cities might laugh at you and your redneck hillbilly town for still believing in ghost stories. Thing is, though, we do believe in them. We believe in them because they're real. They're real and they're dangerous, and if you and your band of pen-pushers ain't going to do anything about it, then we damn sure will. At this point, a chorus of cheers went up from behind and around Mike as the other men in the village felt the force of the idea growing. They would take control of the situation. They would make everything okay. Mike was finally saying what they had been thinking for months, and if that involved saying the word werewolf, where everyone could hear it, then so be it. Of course, it had taken someone to be first, for the rest of the town to find their nerve. The word werewolf had been floating around the town for months, but like the creature itself, it was not seen out in the open. Rather, it skulked and lurked in the darker corners, out of sight, whispered in the later hours by those who had seen one too many horror movies, or had sunk one too many beers at Dell's bar. On those occasions, the word was said with hushed, almost reverential tones, and pronounced with the deadly self-important seriousness only truly achieved by the steadfastly convinced or the seriously drunk. For months, that kind of talk was brushed aside. Nonsense and superstition, people said, but by the time the town meeting rolled around, nonsense and superstition had hardened into cold hard fact and crept by slow degrees to the very top of the agenda. It had started in the spring with the coming of the harvest moon, though it wasn't
Sample complete. Ready to continue?